our present button. It just like stays off. And you can hear it there. Try to like cut off the side of it. Look at that. It's like hanging right off the front. Yeah, that's the only downside to it. It's pretty big.
I'm not sure. If we do this properly, we shouldn't. All right. Good morning. Happy Monday. Anyone else? Happy Monday? I appreciate the Christmas spirit. Lovely. I should give much credit for ugly sweaters. I won't, but I should. I've already had too many chances. Okay, so let's talk about the rest of the semester. I keep getting these emails. I'm supposed to have you do the class assessment. I don't know the official word for it, and I don't have the link with me, but you know where it is when you rate the class and you go through your survey, right? Someone can share with me where the link is, and I'll put it on the board. So we'll do that at the end of class today. I'm supposed to give you time during class to do it. I'm not supposed to be here when you do it, so we'll have to let out a little early so that you can complete the class survey. It takes like half an hour, 45 minutes, right? Okay. So remind me to let you go, like at the 10-minute mark. If I don't remind myself, remind me. So we'll put that on our agenda today. Down here. So you guys know how these work. We do read them. They don't make them available to us until after the final grades are in. And we all read them. They are very helpful. Okay. We're going to do something a little bit different with this chapter. I usually end with the duty of care summary. Today we're going to start with the duty of care summary. This is a tool that kind of has been evolving over time, literally since 2001, I guess, when I first started learning corporations, and duty of care, fiduciary duty, and then it kind of further solidified when I was being sent to the bar, and then kind of evaluating and refining it every semester when I teach this course. So it's your roadmap for discussing fiduciary duty and for discussing these issues that come up. We're going to talk about the group versus law case. I know I didn't have to turn it in. It's a short case. If you haven't read it, I'll give you 2 seconds to go over it before we talk about it. But it gives us a perfect fact pattern with really extreme circumstances to look at how this rule works. So I'm going to walk you through my summary, which is at the end of the PowerPoint, and then we're going to back into how we learn it. So let's start with that, so you know where we're going. Maybe with a spoiler alert, it'll make more sense as we go along the way. So when you're looking at a fact pattern, so here's our example, and we're going to go through the duty of care summary. This is multi-slides. The steps you go through to evaluate whether or not a director has satisfied their duty of care is a multi-step process. We start at the very, very beginning with they have a duty to manage the corporation, and then we're going to get more and more and more specific, and then you're going to get, as you get down to a list of multiple things, you'll start talking about the bad acts, etc. But if you follow the duty of care summary, it's going to be a very, very logical analysis. You can approach any fact pattern with it, and it's a really also good roadmap and flow for evaluating just general issues. It gives you this big umbrella framework, and you're going to get more and more narrow as you go down. You'll see. So let's start with an example. We'll run it through an example. So Hefner, rest his soul, director of Hot Tubs Inc. After studying the issue thoroughly, I won't do it on. Hold on. Studying this issue. Will not be able to get through this lecture. Hefner, director of Hot Tubs Inc., after studying the issues thoroughly, voted to hire a religious choir to promote the company's line of hot tubs with built-in wine coolers, like refrigerators to cool your wine, and video cameras. The idea is a disaster. Has Hefner breached his duty of care? I didn't come up with this sentence. Has Hefner breached his duty of care? I don't know, right? You never know the answer when I ask someone breached their duty of care? You never know the answer. If you have a yes or no with you on the tip of your tongue right now, that's your gut talking. And you don't want to listen to your gut. Could be hungry, could be in a bad mood, nervous about something, not caffeinated enough. You never listen to your gut. You always go back up and say, I don't know, I need to have the rule available for this, right? Because if you follow the rule of law and you ruthlessly apply the law, every time you get to the right result. So, I don't know, has he breached his duty of care? I mean, some of you might be thinking, well, a religious choir to sell hot tubs with built-in wine coolers and video camera seems a little incredible, right? Some of you might be thinking, that's sure going to get attention, and any press is good press, right? So, there's a lot of different frameworks that we approach problems from. We all have our different morality structure and whatever it is that we use to approach our problems, right? So if you just use your own gut and your feelings about this, you're going to come up with various results. But if you go through the duty of care summary that I've crafted for you that integrates all the different fiduciary rules and obligations into it, then all of you will reach the same result, regardless of where you're coming from. And that's what we want. That's what the law is for. That's what the law is for. Okay, so has he breached his duty of care? Well, it'll depend on our analysis. So where we start our analysis, right? These are the rules. This is like what you write in the rule section. So you will literally cut from your reference sheet, like this will be on your reference sheet, and you will cut that into the rule section of your essay, or you will cut that into the rule section of your brain when you're analyzing a fact pattern for a short answer or multiple choice question. I don't think I'll have one, but you will use this exact analysis. So first, as a general rule, this is a rule, directors have a duty to manage the corporation. In managing the corporation, directors are protected from liability by the business judgment rule. They have a duty to manage, they're protected from liability by the business judgment rule, if it applies to that given circumstance. Directors are fiduciaries who owe the corporation duties of care and loyalty. So getting a little more narrow. What is duty of care? Duty of care dictates that the director must act with the care that a prudent person would use with regard to her own business, unless the articles have limited her liability for breach of duty of care, which doesn't happen, generally. Goes on, number 5, see this is 1 through 4, number 5, duty of loyalty. A director or officer may not receive an unfair benefit to the detriment of the corporation or its shareholders unless there's been a material disclosure and independent gratification. So with just this general understanding, before we get into conflict of interest and ratification duty of care, just with number 1 through 4, and we'll touch on 5, let's analyze this. So, now that we visited our rule, let's back again to our back pattern and see if you start reading things a little differently. Hefner, director of Hot Tubs Inc., after studying the issues thoroughly, votes to hire a religious choir to promote the company's line of hot tubs with built-in wine coolers and video cameras. It is a disaster. Has he breached his duty of care? So, directors have a duty to manage the corporation. If you have this 5-part rule, so I've given you a 5-part rule, and there's a rule within a rule, right? We have a rule for business judgment rule. I'll find it on the slide for you and plug it in. But you have to have a paragraph in your analysis for every element of every rule. You have to talk about every rule. So everything you put here, if you don't talk about it in your analysis, you don't have a complete analysis. In order for plaintiff to win, plaintiff has to prove everything. And we're trying to figure out if plaintiff's going to win, right? So the only way we can fully analyze and understand whether plaintiff wins is if we talk about everything. Frequently, in essays, and just in life, we cut to the chase. I'm like, well, I think this is the biggest issue. Let's just go there. But you can't, because you might overlook something important and that is outcome determinative. And we don't really know where to place the value on different principles unless you fully analyze it. Plaintiff can't win unless you discuss everything, so if you don't discuss everything in your analysis, you've missed something, right? So the way to rack up all the points is just to go very thoroughly and very methodically, mathematically through this rule statement. And this is where I think all of the essays can kind of take it to the next level, and where like each of you could, I mean, the foundation is there. You guys scored really well. Your issue spotting was on point in the last exam, for example. Your rules were great. So if you all kicked in with your application and really devoted yourself to having analysis of every single element, you'll do great, even if it's a 1-paragraph rule. The first rule is directors have a duty to manage a corporation. So we have to say something about this in our analysis. So if this was your analysis paragraph, number 1, what would you say, Peria?
He was So in this case, the plaintiff argues that he was managing the corporation by doing his duty as a director and partaking in studying the issue thoroughly and voting, which is his part to do as a director.
Okay, so maybe we should figure out who the plaintiffs and the defendant are. So Hefner is the director. So he was the defendant, right? So we could just say Hef. He's going to argue that he was managing the corporation by
doing his part as a director by studying the issue and voting in the whatever that was going on in the decision.
Okay, and who would be suing Hefner? Maybe the shareholders, right? Either directly or derivatively, right? Either derivatively to advance the interests of the corporation, or directly on behalf of themselves because their share prices have dropped in value. So here, and you can also, if you're not sure who's who, I mean, like, it's always good to figure out who's suing who and for what, right? But you can also just say the names of the people, right? So having shareholders. But the shareholders, who are also the plaintiffs, what are they going to argue on as to element 1?
They're going to argue that was a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
He has a duty to manage
he's not
what's a terrible
thinking
idea.
clearly.
So here, it doesn't we might not have like specific facts that really tie us to the shareholders, but they will have a general statement. Like we'll say, well, you made a bad choice. It resulted in a disastrous outcome. We lost money in business. So it's a general statement. We'll get more deeper into it. But we want to be able to say something on both sides when we can. Okay. Next, in managing the corporation, directors are protected by the business judgment rule. So let's. Where do I have this for you? Okay. So here's your business judgment rule. So our second, this is paragraph 1 of your analysis. Paragraph 2 of your analysis is about that rule statement in managing the directors are protected by the business judgment rule. So the business judgment rule is a defense. And this is where it gets a little different. So most of the rules we learn about are rules that the plaintiff will use in order to establish liability. Like breach of fiduciary duty. You had a duty of good faith, trust, loyalty. You breached that duty because you put your self-interest in front of the corporations. You were having secret profits, X, Y, Z, right? So these are rules that are used offensively by plaintiffs in order to win. Very seldom do we learn defenses. And defenses are rules that are used by the defendant because if they can prove that they've satisfied this rule, then it's a defense to liability. So when it comes to the business judgment rule, the defendant is the one who's trying to establish every element. So this is where it's a little different. Usually it's the plaintiff who satisfies every element and they win. Here, the business judgment rule is a defense available to the directors and the officers. So they're the ones who are going to be satisfied every element. So we're going to start here, whereas we frequently would start with the plaintiff's analysis. Here we're going to start with the defendants, because the plaintiff's going to argue, you don't satisfy it, you don't have the protection of this. Okay? So paragraph 2, regarding the business judgment rule, will have Hef arguing first. He's going to argue that he's protected. Now, if you're not sure what to say, and trust me, in the law of creativity, when it comes to writing style, doesn't get you any points, right? What you want is you want to be in a space where you don't have any writer's block. You follow the formula, that'll get you where you need to go. So you'll say, in this case, or whatever, here, or plaintiff will argue, defendant will argue. Insert the name of the rule, or the summary of the legal theory you're about to discuss. Write the word because, and then plug in the facts, verbatim. It's fine. Because he did X, Y, Z, which means, right? So Hef will argue. And then here's your formula. Okay, I know we went over this before the last exam, but literally this is how we work in the law. This is how we think. This is how we're trained to think in law school. This is how we write on briefs. This is how we argue appeals. This is what the whole thing is. It's very boring, but it works. Let's argue, and then insert summary of the rule, or the principle, or the legal theory. And then write because, and then insert facts. Why they matter. If you do this for every element, you'll have like a very rich analysis. Okay, so who's going to argue for Hefner here? Hefner will argue. Yes.
F will argue that he has a rational basis for believing his decision because he had a better understanding of the market.
Right, so Hef will argue, and so we're going to go through the business judgment rule. So he had a rational basis for making this choice, he had did his research, etc. And then we're going to get into the specifics. So because this is a rule within a rule, we have to have like 3 separate kind of paragraphs within this one framework, right? So he had a rational basis, and now we have to get to element 1. So he will argue, Hef will argue that he made an informed decision, like a summary of this, right? Like it's here, because what shows that he made an informed decision?
That he conducted the research thoroughly.
Yeah, because the fact that he researched it thoroughly, and so he made an informed decision, right? You've got something to plug in there. Great. And then he will also argue, Hef will also argue, and then insert summary of the rule. So he'll also argue he had no conflict of interest because. What are some facts or absence of facts?
Well, it brings up the fact that he voted, so he was not alone in this decision.
Yes. Good. Good. So I love that because you're inferring rational facts that are just logically
Yeah, others
right.
agreed with him that they thought it was a good idea.
Yeah, he's not the only person. That's good. That's awesome. So he made an informed decision. Not only did he investigate, but also he was not the only person who voted in this manner, right? Yes.
I just have a question. If it doesn't say that he did the conflicts of interest, do we assume that he did it or no?
You can say, if you have to assume something, just let me know you're assuming it. But in this instance, like the facts don't give us any information about a conflict of interest. So you can just say, in this case, he can argue he had no conflict of interest because nothing was stated in the fact pattern which would indicate. There's no evidence that he has a relationship with the video camera company or the wine cooler company. Like there's no evidence of any relationship there, so we can presume there's no conflict of interest. So you can just say.
I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking too much, but it didn't say like actually anything happened. He just said like he votes to have that, and then it just said like the idea was a disaster.
It is
but
a disaster. Yeah.
not the outcome because there was no.
Right.
Was there actually? Did he actually hire the choir, or?
Yeah.
We're assuming that he did.
Yeah, and this is where it gets difficult because I only have so much space on a PowerPoint to kind of put all the facts. But it's also good practice because in your exam you'll be like, I being human and also needing to make gray area for you so you can argue. There's always going to be kind of something missing. You're like, what's going on? Like I need to know more about this or that. Well, the fact that you need to know more about it makes it important and means you should discuss it, right? Like we don't know what the damages are. So when you get to best interest of a corporation, right? You can talk about that. You can say, we don't really know what the outcome is. We said it was a disaster, but by what measure, right? Does it mean they lost money or maybe reputational issues? Is it just that they lost an advertising contract because the image of the company changed, and it was inconsistent with the message of some of the people they were advertising with, but at the same time they made more money? Like who knows what that means, right? So you can discuss that. It just gives you an opportunity to discuss it. So whenever there's an ambiguity, take that as an opportunity to show me why that lack of information matters, and you'll get points for that because I know you're thinking and you're analyzing. Okay, so third paragraph. He'll argue that he had a rational basis for believing it's in the best interest of the corporation. This is like a few elements here. You have to discuss rational basis, which kind of support this above analysis speaks to that, right? That he did his investigation, he did his research, he wasn't the only one who voted in favor of it, right? There was a majority there. So it's not like he was irrational and the only person who made this choice. Others made the same choice. And then best interest of the corporation. It's kind of like a two-part. So what will we say here? What can Hef say? Hef will argue that he had a rational basis and made a choice that was in the best interest of the corporation, or he had a rational basis for this belief because.
Like he had a rational basis because he did his due diligence in terms of like researching, and the decision was in the best interest of the company at that time because they voted.
Right.
It would be their decision.
Right. And so I want to point out that that's correct, completely valid arguments, and that it's reminiscent and it might be the same argument or same fact as what we might have set up here. It's still relevant and it still supports it, right? You still have to prove every single element. So just because you already used one fact doesn't mean you're repeating yourself. You're just being really clear. Think about the most persuasive speakers you've ever heard. The most persuasive speakers you've ever heard. They're redundant. They say the same thing in a few different ways. Like remember, like when you're, I don't know if you've done this when you're doing presentations, you're supposed to tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And that's supposed to be really effective. But if you think about it, we have the attention span of like, what is it? Earthworms? Yeah, 10 seconds. Like, we have very short attention spans, and we have to be captured, and we have to keep it going. I'm not going to think, oh my God, you use that fact again. I'm going to think, you realize how important that fact was because it speaks to many elements. So repeat yourself. It's okay. That's more analysis. It's good. So sometimes I get that feedback from students. I know I should talk about this again. So talk about it. Anything that adds more clarity is better. And I repeat myself a lot in here. Purposeful. Okay, so that's our business judgment rule. Now what's the plaintiff going to argue? The plaintiff is going to try to say the business judgment rule does not protect you because. What might the plaintiff argue? The plaintiffs are the shareholders who say it was a disaster, it was bad for the corp. And they need a lawyer too, yes.
If he didn't have any experts?
Yeah. There's no evidence that he hired an expert. Who made this choice? Was it just a bunch of people sitting around and be like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea? Or did they outsource, hire experts, you need consultants to come and make this choice, advertising professionals, marketing professionals, social media professionals, people who could look at the demographic they're trying to serve and figure out what's working for that demographic, right? Or did you just decide it was a good idea? Like, who's on boards? Remember when we looked at the boards?
Well, isn't it the shareholders' duty to vote people if they want on the board?
Yes, exactly. The shareholders, true. The shareholders do have a duty. That's what the shareholders do is they place the board members. And who are board members usually? Like what's the demographic of board members? So when we looked at these publicly traded corporations at the very first day of corporations.
White men in their 60s?
Yeah, right. So I mean, demographically, they're not representative of every single demographic that may be trying to serve, right? And they also don't have expertise in every single area. So that's where consultants come in. If your demographic is women from 18 to 35, then like maybe they would need an expert, right? Because they're not in that space. So you bring up a really, really good point. And that's one of the reasons why consultants are so critical. Okay, so.
Wait, can they argue that against the, like, is that something that you can argue, that the director can argue and say, like, you know, you guys voted me into this position to work in your best interest? Like, is that like an argument?
It wouldn't protect them from a breach of fiduciary duty.
Because
I can imagine a fact pattern where it could be relevant.
Yeah, I mean, shareholders have a duty to vote, and if you just choose not to vote or you vote a certain way,
Right.
that's who's going to be taking control of your money, basically the money that you're investing in the company.
Right, you can say, look, I have this certain type of reputation, and when you voted me into this role, like I am Hugh Hefner, and I made a number of choices throughout my life and throughout my career, and you kind of knew what you were signing up for when you voted me into this position. So I'm a little surprised that you were surprised by my choice, but like you could, yeah, I could see that being like an argument. He's better off satisfying the rule, but yes, it is relevant because it goes to shareholder duties as well.
I think that kind of has to do with the fact that you have to prove that it is what he thought was best for the company.
Yeah.
And that's, you voted him in, and this is his.
These are good. I've never heard this. This has never come up before. I like it. Yeah, exactly. And you have to come up with these more creative arguments also when someone just does not have the facts for them, right? You have to kind of read through the facts and find some other evidence that helps them. Yes?
Would Hefner argue that if the idea was a success, then there would have been no breach of duty of care?
I mean, there could still be a breach of duty of care. You could just be really lucky, right? I mean, Because how is it defined? Does there have to be a bad outcome for there to be a breach of fiduciary duty? I mean, I guess you have to have damages, right? The measure of damages could be weighed differently.
Right, but would they even bring a lawsuit if they made money? And
Probably not, possibly not. Okay, so there's a few courts, right? You have your court of law and your court of public opinion. And then I guess there's like the bank account court, right, where you just like want a lot of money, right? And you win and you got a lot. But the court of law tells you when you're liable, when you're not, when you're breaking law, when you're not, when you are in trouble, when you're not, legally. And then there's the court of public opinion. And you can be making a lot of money and not be doing so well in the court of public opinion, right? And then eventually develop your reputational issues, and eventually the concern for shareholders would be that those reputational issues are going to compound and your profits are going to fall as a result. So it depends. I mean, you can.
Are we speculating that?
Yeah.
That the, what the market's going to do the next minute?
Okay.
You know, so the way I'm looking at it is like, if I'm reading this, it was a bad idea initially, but like you said, all press is good press. But more people are now aware of the brand, and so over time, maybe their sales went up and the stock prices went up.
Maybe. Yeah. Exactly. And speculative.
Yes.
Speculative. That's something that courts deal with often. That's something courts deal with often. There's something called the advisory opinions. They won't issue advisory opinions. They wait till there are real damages. But people's assessment of harm is different, right? So all good points. Okay, so that gets us through. That whole discussion was just element 2 of our multi-part rule, right? So let's keep going. Directors are fiduciaries who owe the corp a duty of care and loyalty. We need to say something about this. We can't just make a statement. We have to actually have a little paragraph on it. So what would we say? Plaintiff's going to argue. The shareholders will argue. Yes?
Can they literally just argue that he was a director and directors owe a fiduciary duty?
Yeah. Yeah, you can literally just say, plaintiff should argue that because he's a fiduciary, he's a director, he's a fiduciary, so he does owe the corporate duty of care and loyalty, which means he has to put the interest of the corporation before himself. And literally that lets me know you know what this means and we can move on. Right? He has to put the interest of the corporation before himself. He has to make choices that are in the best interest of the corporation, not his own best interest. And then you move on to duty of care. Right? So it's okay to like just say that. It just kind of flows, makes more fluid, it lets me know you understand, and you're not skipping a really important step. Now we get to duty of care. More specifically, the rule is, and you'll have this in the rules section, duty of care, a director must act with the care that a prudent person would use if they directed their own business, unless articles have limited their liability for breach of duty of care, which we don't have in our fact pattern. So care that a prudent person would use in their own business. The shareholders will argue that we didn't act with duty of care, consistent with what a prudent person would use with their own business because.
so that's that he did act with the care necessary because it was voted on. It's not like he just did the action and the response didn't arise until the negative consequences of the sales.
Okay, so have more. Okay, I did vote on it, and we didn't have these negative consequences initially. I wouldn't have foreseen it, and I wouldn't have done it if it was a bad consequence. The shareholders want to argue something. What will the shareholders argue? Yes.
This is something that could be foreseen, that this,
And why? Why is it foreseeable?
because it's not an idea that would work for other companies.
Yeah, I mean it's patently incompatible. Religious choir, hot tubs with built-in wine coolers and cameras. Religious choir, hot tubs, cameras, wine coolers. Should I say it again? Religious choir. Like, I mean, maybe it's like this. I don't know. Like, I don't mean to put up. It's like this. It's all okay. But it's patently incompatible. Like, you're really taking a risk. This is not how traditionally people market hot tubs, right? You're being really out there. You know you're taking a risk. This isn't classic. And because you know you're taking a risk, maybe you're being irresponsible, or maybe you're taking risks at our expense, right? They're not your consequences. The consequences borne by the corporation. So literally getting to the, like, you have to discuss these facts. We haven't really discussed them yet, but that's it. It's on the foreseeable. It would have been foreseeable. This is really incompatible, kind of very unique, if anything, marketing campaign. for this type of product. So, could offend a number of people,
Yes.
right? I mean, my mom, who lived in a convent, would definitely be offended by this, like, definitely 1000% offended by this. And that can hurt brand image, right? Especially now in today's climate, like, I didn't come up with this example, I like it, can't take credit for it, but when did I hear this? I think this is part of when I was taught this, like 2000 and something, like really long time ago. Things were different then, when I was in law school. A long time ago, don't do math. But now, we have Me Too, we have Christmas songs that are being taken off the air, like Baby It's Cold Outside. There's a station that won't play that song because of the lyrics, right? It's, and recently, gosh, the director of Last Tango in Paris died this week. So that film, the 1972 film, is now back in the news. And at the time, it was like, you know, film noir, people were like, okay, scandalous. And it was the first film ever to like not be rated because it was so adult. But there are certain scenes that are coming back into the conversation because the climate we're in now. So when when my professor thought this up in 2002 or 2001, when I learned this, it was different than it is in 2018. There's a different conversation happening. So might this idea have been okay at certain times and it's really not okay now? It's possible that we're so much more in tune that as a society we're in a different space now. So maybe this choice in this space is not okay, right? And maybe it's more foreseeable now because our sensitivities are raised, and even then we should be more aware. So
I use non-traditional marketing all the time, and sometimes it turns out great.
right,
Like, I think a recent example was when Nike used that advertising for like the football kneeling, and a lot of people disagreed with that, but sales went way up. So, I
right,
mean, I don't see that. I didn't see any lawsuit when it worked out great
right.
in that situation.
And even then, if there is a lawsuit, whatever you're paying out in that lawsuit, if it's offset by sales, you're still okay, right? Yeah, and Super Bowl ads are getting more and more kind of edgy, and so it can go both ways. I like the fact pattern. There's a lot to argue. It's always a good one. Okay, so but you see how these are the only facts we have. We have a really rich discussion with just these facts. So imagine on your exam when you have this many facts, how much I'm gonna want to hear about. You have it's not really what I want to hear. It's that I'm equipping you with all these hints, and I'm letting you know. I'm giving you hints to what I want you to share with your knowledge with you. Like this is what I want you to talk about. Okay. Yes.
So when we're writing about duty and care summary,
Mm-hmm.
and we're doing the IRAC,
Yes.
you want to
If it's on the exam.
when we do it, you want to see both plaintiff and defendant side on each 5 of these.
If there is something, I mean, I don't want you to be irrational. If you have to really reach and say something ridiculous to argue for the other side, don't go in there. I mean, if they don't have an argument, you're like, there's really no logical argument, there's no excuse for this, right? You could just say that. But if there's something, if there's an arguable fact or something that they could use, then yeah.
Still write it out.
Yeah.
Even if there's no argument, right now there is no argument. So,
Yeah.
plaintiff would argue this, defendant would argue this too, plaintiff would argue this, and just go along that kind of,
Yeah, I mean,
write it out that way.
yeah, yes, if you find, especially if you find that you're not arguing both sides of every issue, or if you're skipping things, like if in the past it's, oh, you skip this element, you can discuss this element, just use that formulaic approach, like I won't be bored, I'll be like, okay, it just shows me that you've
I
thought
tend to
about it.
skip, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, exactly, to go back to the formula. And I try to teach this as mathematically and formulaic as possible because we're in a college of business, and you guys are taking finance and accounting and all these different like mathematic classes. If I was in philosophy, I'd be teaching this a little more esoterically, but this is what I hope is digestible, right? So just go with it, and this is how we do it. There's no extra points for being creative or flowery with your words. Native natural. Okay. Duty of loyalty. So the last thing we'll get into is duty of loyalty. A director or officer may not receive an unfair benefit to the detriment of the corporation or its shareholders unless there's been a material disclosure and independent gratification. So before we discuss this and analyze this element with our fact pattern, let's talk about what this means. So Classic violations are self-dealing, so causing the corporation to enter into a contract with that director or with a corporation or entity that's owned or managed by that director, another second entity. So self-dealing, dealing with yourself and your entity in a way that advantages the director. Usurping corporate opportunities, that's the Goof versus Loft case, the Pepsi-Cola case that we're going to get into. Taking an opportunity that has been tendered to your corporation, and instead of having the corporation capitalize on that opportunity and pursue it, you're pursuing it individually instead. Oppressing minority shareholders, locking them into their ownership, or not giving them a market for their shares, or not issuing dividends, so they're not getting the benefit of their shareholder status, right? You don't have to issue dividends, but if you do it without a logical basis, like that. And trading on inside information. So those are typical violations. There are more, but these are the classic ones you got to keep on the lookout for. The conflict of interest. This is where the director or officer is on both sides of the deal, or is privately benefiting from the transaction aside from merely being a shareholder of the entity. So directors are generally also going to be shareholders of the entity, and they can benefit from a transaction if it's as a shareholder of the entity. If it's them personally, because they're making money, because they own this other entity that's contracting with the corporation, that's bad. Okay, here's your test. And it's going to be familiar from our other sections. Transactions must be fair to the corporation and either be approved, informed consent, remember? Be approved by a majority of the informed disinterested directors, or approved by a majority of the shares held by informed disinterested shareholders, or just generally fair. Would a reasonable person in an arm's length transaction have bound the corporation to this deal? So let's back up for a minute. This is very similar to the breach of fiduciary duty tests that we learned earlier. For example, in partnership or anything else, if you get informed written consent, then it's okay, right? You can be on both sides of the deal. You can make a profit in a transaction as long as it's informed written consent. Well, here, now we're contemplating the fact that people are imperfect and they're messy. So they may enter into a transaction, and it might be that they don't get it approved. Well, is it going to be a conflict of interest just because it wasn't approved? No, because if it's fair to the corporation and a reasonable person in an arm's length transaction would enter into it, there's no breach. Right? You may not have had it approved by the majority of directors, which you should have. You may not have had it approved by the majority of shareholders, which you should have, didn't. But still, even in the absence of this, there won't be liability if you can prove it's fair to the corporation and a reasonable person in an arm's length transaction would have bound it, have bound the corporation to the deal. So this, or this. And this is taken out of it because it's the most important one, and it's what you usually see. So it's usually fair, and then really defining fair.
You just need one of the following.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
So it's A or B.
A or B, or it's just fair, right? Because, but then if you prove that, there's no damages. And I'm trying to simplify the way that the book teaches it while also staying true to it. But really, if you could just prove that it's fair, there are no damages and you would have won anyway.
So it needs either A or B along with fair, or
it's just fair.
or just fair alone.
Yeah, but under this definition.
Okay.
Yeah, a reasonable person in an arm's length transaction would have bound the corporation. So, and what's arm's length transaction mean? Independent, right? Arm's length. And they literally use like this imagery, like I use this language a lot, arm's length transaction, when I'm writing up motions for preliminary approval, trying to get the court to approve a settlement agreement. I have to prove to the court that it was negotiated at arm's length. The vision we're trying to give the court is that like this is the conference table and we're on other sides. It was at all times adversarial, meaning that this side is thinking of their own best interest, I'm thinking of my client's best interest. It's adversarial, arm's length, there's no collusion. It's the opposite of in bed together. Arm's length is completely separate. So those are the kind of colloquialisms that you would see. So that gives you an idea. It's not just independent, it's like independent, separate, distinct, apart. There's no shared interests. Okay. Judy, here's sorry. There's more. Usurping a corporate opportunity is another example of a violation of duty of care. what if there's a situation that you think would otherwise qualify as use of corporate opportunity, but later, after this happened, the directors looked at it and it was ratified, then there's another way to defend that position. Ratification in this context, it's the same as ratification in another context, but in the words of corporations means the director may defend a claim by obtaining independent ratification through a majority vote of independent directors or shareholders. So this is what I've done, can you please vote to ratify this behavior? And then the corporation is adopting that behavior, accepting the behavior, and it's no longer going to be seen viewed as a breach of duty of care. Okay, so here's an example. Alice, one of 10 directors of Diamond Merchants Inc., spots choice diamonds and buys them for herself for $1 million. Alice then resells them to her court for $2 million. Alice, however, disclosed her conduct to the board, and at a board meeting attended by 9 other board members, 5 of them then voted to ratify her transaction. What liabilities, if any, does Alice have? Before we start analyzing this, because we're getting into like test prep zone, can we just go and point out the facts? Like when you were reading this for your exam, like what are you underlining? What's the first thing you underline?
One of 10 directors.
One of 10 directors. And then why would you underline it? What's like the legal theory that pops into your head when you measure? Yeah, she's a director, so there's fiduciary duty, and now we're thinking quorum, because there's 10 directors, and we know the number of directors, and so the court can make a choice of quorum. Okay, so what's the next thing after one of 10 directors and you underline?
I would underline the part about how she bought them for herself.
Buys them for herself, and what's that making you think about?
That she bought them for personal reasons.
And the legal theory that we're thinking?
No secret profits.
No secret profits, right? So secret profit, conflict of interest. So just write like the shorthand of that legal theory that you think of somewhere along the margin. What's the next thing that we would underline?
Disclosed.
Resells them. Okay, so resells them for $2 million. And what are we thinking? What theory would we think of?
Personal gain.
Self-interest.
It says later that she disclosed it, but at first it doesn't say that.
Yeah, secret profit, self-dealing, right? And literally write them down in order. And if you have to write, we won't say the profit up here. Now we're writing it again? Yes. That means you really, really should talk about it, right? Really, really. Okay, and then, so we just sold them for $2 million. Okay, and now what's the next thing you're going to underline? Disclosed it. Okay, disclosed her conduct. So what are we thinking of now?
She didn't breach her. It's not a conflict of interest.
Yeah, consent,
Yeah.
right? Consent, not secret profit, disclosed, informed consent, ratification perhaps. Just any of those words that just let you know. But, okay, next, disclosed. What comes next? What do we underline next?
To vote to ratification?
Okay, so we're gonna, whoa. Okay, so we underline this, and you're gonna go all the way down here, but there's all these words I wrote.
That the meeting was attended by 9 board members.
Yes. Board meeting attended by the other 9 board members. So what legal principles or theories or whatever do right here?
Quorum.
Quorum. We have quorum, right? Everyone's there. And those are disinterested directors, right? It's only her. Only she's the only one that has an interest in those diamonds. So there's 9 disinterested directors there. So now we have a quorum, and we're in a board meeting, which is where these choices take place. But definitely, you have the right quorum, at least there at minimum. And then, okay. And then you're going to go here. Isn't that
5 members.
5 members. And so what's that make us think? Majority, okay. Yes, right. So, and well, there's a quorum there.
Well, I'm looking at it as she's the 6th one, 5 of the members.
Vote, yeah,
Well,
but
maybe, I don't know. because
she voted to not do that.
Ooh, this is good.
She didn't vote against herself, so it's 5 versus 5. So
Let's keep issue spotting. All right, so 5. Okay, so the 9 other board members are there. 5 voted to ratify. Okay, all right.
That's not a majority vote.
What is required is,
Well, yeah, I was gonna ask, like, the 9 other ones are there and she's also there, so that's 10. So is that 5 including her, like 5 and 5, or 6 versus 4?
I know, so who thinks this might be okay? Just your gut, just listen to your, might be okay. Who thinks this might not be okay?
What? What are
Okay.
you asking?
Okay, like just this in general, like is this, you think she's okay?
No, if she didn't sell it.
I think she
Discuss this, I think she's okay.
All right. Okay. So there's a little bit of conflicting feelings in the room, but go to the rules, it'll get you there. What's it say? Directors may defend a claim by obtaining independent ratification through a majority vote of independent directors or shareholders. Majority vote of independent directors or shareholders. So, the 9 other friends are there. So there's 10, but she's interested. The 9 are disinterested. And what is the majority of 9?
5.
5. What's the majority of 10?
6.
6. But she's disinterested. I mean, she's interested. There's only 9 disinterested. So, I know. So now who's okay with it?
So that's some weird math.
I know, weird math, right? That's the law for you.
She wouldn't be voting too?
No, because she'd have to recuse herself. She'd have to recuse
Well,
herself.
she's interested.
She's interested. A majority vote of independent directors. So she's not independent. She has an interest in the transaction.
Well, yeah, so she would vote to not
She would
ratify.
recuse herself and not vote at all.
I know.
So there are 9 independent disinterested directors. 5 of the 9 voted in favor of it. So much easier to learn this stuff through example. Because I read this and you guys are like, yeah, got it. And then we went down to the example and I'm like, forgot it. Okay, so I know I always say this, and I always actually go look at your exams too, because sometimes like if I get an essay that is like the rule statement is really, really good, but I don't have all the discussion that I would expect from that kind of rule statement, I'll go and I look at the exam and it's all underlined and stuff, and I'm like, great, students thinking. But why didn't those facts, like if those facts that the student underlined made it into the analysis and they literally put them after the because, all the points would be there, like you got it, just like talk about it, right? So the reason why I went through this exercise is because after you underline something, do not underline something unless you have something to say about it. Just 1 or 2 words, like whatever legal theory you're reminded of, just put those words out just like we did, and you'll notice rights and duties change as facts change and time changes. Like, so you're always going to go in chronological order. So all those issues we put here, you would discuss those in order, and if you discuss all of those things, you'd get full credit if you actually discuss those facts. So that when you go to discuss secret profit, you make sure you insert the facts, like literally cut them from here, cut them from the fact pattern. I don't care if you use the exact same words from the fact pattern on your exam. I know your source, right? I'm okay. No bibliography, it's cool. And just literally cut them and paste it into your essay after the because. And now I know you know all the different facts that serve as evidence for whoever's arguing secret profit, right? So the shareholders argue there was a secret profit because, you bought it for this, you sold it from this, but then she says she disclosed it, and the rule says that, if you disclosed it, it's fine, right? So you'll talk about everyone's argument. And because it's chronologically, you'll be able to talk about how this shifted the rights and duties, and how those rules are satisfied. And this duty of care summary, also the way it flows, would accommodate that chronological flow. Yes?
Can you repeat that term where, since Alice was interested in the transaction?
She would recuse herself. So recusal comes up a lot at board meetings. For example, one of the first things we do at meetings, and I'm sure you do this at clubs, like, do you take minutes of your meetings? And then at the next meeting, you vote to approve the minutes?
Yeah.
And you can't vote to approve the minutes of a meeting you weren't at. I mean, you shouldn't. I mean, you can, should not. I mean, you can actually raise your hand like, I approve, but you shouldn't do that because you weren't there, and you have no rational basis to conclude that what's on the paper in those minutes reflects what happened there because you weren't there. So you should be recusing yourself, affirmatively not voting, and saying, I'm not going to vote because I either have lack of information or interest in the transaction or whatever it is we're voting on. So recusal. Okay. was gonna get into Jeff Sessions, but I won't. But he had recused himself and about that. But it does play out, it's in every committee. It's not just like these boards and things like that, like political committees. You'll see these words used, it's the same definition. Okay. So now let's back up a step. So that's our duty of care summary. I hope you enjoyed it. Let's go back to where we ended last time. So this is where we ended with this stuff, right? Yes. So good. Okay, so that's what these public shareholder meetings look like. You know, someone's on stage and they're talking, and then people are asking questions. There's an open forum. Shareholders can go up and ask questions and telling us how like just devastated and disappointed they are, whatever. Now they're upset about his pot smoking habits. You want to know just how much he is smoking. Would that matter?
I mean, unless it has decisions that harm the shareholders, like he's taking his fiduciary duty to care about the shareholders, then.
Right. So, but is it different? Is it any different than having like an alcoholic principle of an entity? Sure. Right? So the question that arises, and I want to get to this because there's another concept called fitness to serve, right? Is fitness to serve. If you're fit to serve a few, I guess there's a lot of examples, but what they're questioning about him is whether or not he's fit to serve based on his smoking, or if someone was alcoholic or any other issues, you know, are they fit to serve? Are they fit to serve if they are engaging in conduct that is compromising the corporation, if they're one of these Me Too, individuals who are being accused of inappropriate conduct. So that's another example. It's not just are you making choices that are aligned with the corporation's best interests, but also are you fit to serve. So on that topic, removal. We know the shareholders vote in the directors, so obviously that's who removes them too, and another basis. So directors are removed by the shareholder vote. Generally. Their term also usually has a limit, so maybe it'll be a 2-year term they're elected for, or a 3-year term. Frequently the terms will stagger, so if there's a 9-member board, for example, 3 seats will come up every year. So there's always a continuity, and there's a little transition every year, but there's some members who continue every year because of the staggering of the votes. Or by a court. So if you want the court to remove a board member, you have to prove this test. The shareholders have to prove either 1 + 3 and 4. So any of these, plus number 4. 4 has to be proven. So you have to prove the director engaged in fraudulent conduct with respect to the corporate shareholders, or the director grossly abused their position, or intentionally harmed the corporation. And these are so vague. Is someone intentionally harming the corporation by going on it was videotaped, I think it was on radio, smoking pot? Like, is it harm? Is it right? Some people are like, think they like Tesla more now because of that, right? And some people think, you're a professional, what are you doing? Like, there's a lot of different opinions. So, is that intentional harm? Well, I mean, harm maybe. I mean, have they quantified it? Who knows? Is it intentional? Is he intentionally harming?
No.
Is he grossly abusing his position of power as a director? His tweets saying he's going to take it private, is that gross abuse? If someone wants to remove him as a director,
Because one could argue he does more positive advertising about, you know, Elon from SpaceX.
right?
The next big thing that he's trying to think of is shows innovation, so more positive than that's negative.
Yeah, innovations and brilliance, and it's like opposite of conventional thought, right? So are we going to be more permissive? There's no real answer to this. I'm just trying to show you the various ways we can think about it. A lot of the examples are like that was about business choice, but it goes into other areas. And now with information being more widely available, we have information about people's personal lives and their fitness to serve and other things that are now part of the calculus that weren't part of the equation before when these rules are being developed. So your personal life and the personal life of these leaders is more on display, and someone in a hotel, their bad act in a hotel room in their personal capacity is going to impact their fitness to serve on the entity. Yeah, it's because you're information, it's not because of the information access. We know it because of the information access. When these rules were developed, we didn't know all this about all these people, right? So there's more information and more facts that are going to be relevant to this than just their mere decision making if they're making choices like that would otherwise, they wouldn't have the ability to make. Okay, so, and just to reiterate, this is where the court is being asked to remove the director. So the shareholder can sue, as part of their lawsuit for damages, they would sue for an order of removal as well. So they sue for damages, but also ask the court to enter an order removing them from the board. So prove all of these and that it's in the best interest of the corporation that they be removed. Okay.
So he stepped down, right, from,
He still has a role.
He's at the,
I don't want to
on
misstate
the
it.
board, but not.
He's not the chair.
No, not the chairman.
He's still the CEO.
He's still CEO.
And it's different. I mean, see, officers owe fiduciary duties as well. And I don't frequently, like, we use this language as instructors, officers owe fiduciary duties as well. They're agents of the entity, and through agency law, we learn the agents owe fiduciary duty to the principal, and officer is an agent of the principal corporation. So that this duty that we discuss, they don't have the duties to vote at board member meetings, because that's what board members do, right? But they still owe these fiduciary duties, the duty of care, all of that. That extends to officers as well. So he still has those obligations. But it's different. He's not the chair of the board anymore. Okay. So meetings of the board of directors. Quorum is required to act. Usually the bylaws will say a majority constitutes a quorum. It can say otherwise though. If they want a supermajority, whatever, it can say. But usually the bylaws will say a majority, but you turn to the bylaws of a corporation to figure out what they want. The meetings don't have to be in person. For a long time they did, but now technologically facilitating these meetings is fine. They are still frequently in person. And I currently represented all these entities as plaintiffs in the Petrova's lawsuit. She's flying around the world to personally appear at board meetings to update the board on the status of the lawsuit. And, you know, and she's got these young kids. She's traveling with like her 9-month-old and her 2-year-old on an airplane, first class. It's like easier that way. She's still traveling like across the world all the time, all over the place. And I'm like, why do you have to physically go to all these meetings? She's like, well, they want me there. I'm like, are they all there? Yeah, they're all there. Okay, I mean, I understand. I understand. So even though technology can facilitate this, frequently, especially the larger ones, they get together. Maybe they have one meeting a year. They all get together, and there's ways you can communicate and just facilitate that are just so much more effective in person. So it can be technology, but frequently that's not okay. And there are certain types of boards where you cannot have these meetings that are not in person. For example, the board I was on, there's certain state rules regarding this type of entity we were running that didn't permit board meetings to be technologically facilitated. So we had to have a quorum every time. So the laws of the state also, or the government type of organization, need to keep that laws. Okay, closed corporations. So, someone remind me in 5 minutes about the evaluations. Okay, I might remember. I might not. Managing closed corporations. So the laws vary by state. And remember that these closed corporations are the smaller corporations, right? The ones with fewer shareholders, limited shareholders. It might be that it's just one. It might be one shareholder. That shareholder owns the entity. This person just incorporated themselves. They wanted that limited liability protection, but they just incorporated themselves. And so do we have to sit together with ourselves and have a meeting? What do we have to do? What are the, how do we satisfy our obligations? Well, California, for example, and I'm not going to use any other state laws, just California. It permits closed corporations to manage like partnerships. So not only can they be taxed like partnerships, they can make that election to be taxed like partnerships, but also they can elect and manage like partnerships. And if that's the case, then these requirements for the board of director meetings and things like that are not going to be as stringent. In the event that you have a closed corporation that has, and remember the rules, if there's more than 3 shareholders, you have to have the 3 directors. If there's less, then it's less. But so you can be in a position where you have a number of directors on the board of a closed corporation, and in that case, the closed corporation may require that a supermajority be present in voting, requiring 3/4 or unanimous approval so that the minority shareholders are protected. So this information you'll find in the bylaws, but and I put it here just so that you, first of all, can see the competing interests. Right? If it's a closed corporation, it's owned by fewer people. And think of the family corporation, think of the magical soap that we learned about, right? And there are people who could just be stuck as shareholders. It's a small entity, there's not a huge market for those shares. There may be some restrictions on transfer of the shares that are written into the bylaws. And so if those smaller shareholders aren't heard, they could just be stuck and tied into their investment. Their money is locked up, they've bought shares, they're not getting dividends, they can't sell their shares, like literally their money is locked up. So these kinds of rules, these allow for a little more protection for the minority shareholders. And remember what we call that kind of lockup or disadvantaged minority shareholders is again oppression. We call it oppressing the minority shareholders. Oppression. Oppression is that part. Okay. So we're almost to the duty of care summary. Which is good. So officer authority and liability. So remember the officers are fiduciaries. They include the president, VP, secretary, all of that. They're agents of the corporation, and they have, accordingly, express authority and implied authority. We learned about authority, and you know that express or implied authority or actual authority. We also have this apparent authority issue. Remember, if you say someone's a VP of marketing, they probably have extensive authority for marketing, and them giving their card that says VP of marketing to someone is conveying that authority, right? So you're creating the apparent authority. There are reasons why people walk that person down when they're fired out of the building and have security experts around with their box, right? You want to eliminate that apparent authority. You take the phone, you take the computer, you take the name tag, you take the cards. So it's the same authority issues. Ratification, we talk about ratification on the part of the board. It can be expressed board resolution or implied by the board's acceptance of the benefits of an officer's act or the officer's contract that they entered into. And officers are not personally liable for torts and contracts of the corporation. Same as directors, right? They're not personally liable for torts and contracts of the corporation. They have that limited liability protection. The shell of the corporation protects their liability. But then again, they'll still be liable if they have their own independent bad act. If they sexually harass someone at work, that's a tort, right? Then they're going to be independently liable for their own bad act. Or if they commit a crime or other issue that might be derived of their personal act that is not within their authority. They do owe fiduciary duty. Officers owe fiduciary duty, including the duty to act within the scope of the powers of the corporation. So the duty to act within their authority, and the duty to act within the authority that the corporation has. For nonprofit corporations, remember we have the purpose statement in the nonprofit corporation articles of incorporation. So, for example, the officers of the nonprofit would have a duty to make sure that their behaviors were consistent within that purpose statement. And officers must, okay, we talked about that. Directors and officers are liable for losses to the corporation caused by their lack of due diligence, and so if the corporation incurs some sort of losses, they can sue them to recoup those losses. And we'll end here, because that gets us to business judgment all over here. Okay, so we'll end here with this slide. Directors and officers, fiduciary duty. We learned about fiduciary duty. This is one way we can articulate it. And if we articulate it in this way on our exam, like if you write this rule statement on your exam this way, and then you write a paragraph about every element, you're going to have a fabulous, well-reasoned exam. So board members and officers shall act. Here's the test. You cut and paste this into your exam. In good faith, in a manner the individual reasonably believes is in the best interest of the corporation, and with the care that a person in a like position may reasonably believe appropriate under the circumstances. So reasonable investigation, honest belief, etc. It's based on the facts presented at the time. Do you remember our Hugh Hefner example? Well, we didn't know until afterwards it was a disaster. So when you analyze these situations, you have to make sure only to consider facts that were present at the time. What was that board member or the officer presented with? What decisions were they presented with? And facts gave those decisions. And the breach of duty care results in liability to the corporation for losses incurred. We're going to start up back here because this is important. So next class, yes. So I'm going to actually bring the written answers and hand them out to you, and then kind of an outline of what I was looking for in the essay, just so you can compare it to yours. And if someone has a really good one, maybe I'll post it with permission. So just so you know what to expect for next class though, I do want to talk about group fever, so we're going to talk about that quickly.
I just wanted, you said that today was the day that we had to confirm our extra credit or our
Yes,
grades?
so I'm going to put your exam scores in today. I'll put your exam scores in today. It's in my calendar to do it. So what I want you to do is your exam scores and your extra credit, everything will be released today. And just go and look at it. And you'll see any extra credit you've done when you open up your exam, because I just add it as points to an exam. It'll say plus 3, 4, and it'll say what it was for. So every extra credit that you believe you did should be reflected somewhere in your exam scores. And if it's not, I need to know, you know, this week, next week, just before your final, just so I make sure that it's all counted, I
I
guess.
just want to double check when our final is, the date.
It's the last day of class,
The 10th or the 12th?
the 10th. Yeah, and we're gonna, it's exam 3. So it's exam 3.
So next Monday? Yeah.
Oh, really? I cannot even believe where this was. Okay, your exam 3 is Monday.
Can we have an hour?
An hour?
And 15 minutes?
The 10th. It's exam 3. It's not comprehensive. It's exam 3. So this exam 3 is actually less material than usual. It's just corporations, and you're already ready. Like if you've been preparing as you go, like you pretty much got it. This stuff is like all repetitive of what we've learned. It's just in the corporations, so you're ready. It's 75-minute exam. I will bring the answers. I totally lose sight of the day though. It's going really, really fast. So what you will have with you for Wednesday, I'm going to bring the answers. I'm going to hand them out to you though. I can't post them online. So answers to the practice test. I think.
My portal says the 12th.
Yeah, your portal is if you were to have a final exam, it says the 12th. Right, so for final exams, that's the time that's reserved to us. But, so, some people utilize the final exam time, like if you have a final exam. Depending on the course, I'll have it, if it's exam 1, 2, 3, I'll put it on the last day of class. It just depends. So our exam is on the last day of class, it's exam 3. Our real estate law class is a little different, more cumulative. So, yeah, exam 3. Don't freak out, you got it. So Wednesday, we're still going to start here because it's really important, and this is just going to be a recap. We've already gone over the duty of care summary. So we're going to finish this, and we're going to do some work in chapter 44. I will send an announcement and let you know exactly what at 44 you need to know. You'll probably notice I posted a homework assignment, but I took the due date off of it a week or 2 ago because I wasn't really sure what we were going to do with that. So let me revisit that. You'll get an announcement today that lets you know what our expectations are for Wednesday. Wherever we leave that will be like the end of the material you need to know. We've already covered in some way all of this important stuff. You've already taken the gateways, right? Right. So you'll have everything you need to move forward. And good, I promise. Okay. So you'll have that today. You'll have what you need today. I increased my office hours substantially from last week's class. I mean, I'm always here. Like a lot of you have come times that I'm not in my classic office hours. I'm here. But I encourage you to come if you haven't come see me. Come see me. If you're nervous about your final exam and you don't know what I expect of you at this point, come see me. Like I don't want that for you. I want you to know what you're getting yourself into. I want you to succeed. I don't get paid extra if you don't. Like, there's no benefit for me. The better you look, the better I look. Like, I want you to do well. So I really mean it. Come see me in my office. If my office hours don't work for you, email me. We'll make a time. If you can't come in, we'll have a call, right? It'll work out. So, frequently, yeah. And if you need to see me, we will work it out. And a lot of times students will, like, if I get a lot of requests for Friday, I'll come in on the Friday. We'll have a call, maybe Skype or anything like that. Okay, I'm going to leave. What's that website? I'm supposed to write on the board.
See sunset. See sunset.
csun.edu/. CSUN.edu/SE, right? Someone go to it? SEF. SEF. Okay, so do your evaluations, evaluate the class. They look at these, they review us every year. They want us to do a good job. So please take the time. I'm not supposed to be here when you do it. So again, questions?